Thank you, Presiding Officer, and congratulations to Graham Simpson, who makes the very bold and I'm sure entirely justified claim that nothing went wrong on his watch. He was careful, of course, to draw his claim quite narrowly, so I dare say we may have revelations at another point in his parliamentary career that draw a distinction from the claim that he's made today. But he and other members of the committee have done a fine job in bringing to the Parliament something which has such a universal consensus of the merit of the proposal that's before us today. The Social Security Committee has done a fine job. Now, in a perfect world, of course, everyone who requires assistance, everyone would be able to act in their own interest at all times. In the case of juveniles, of course, that is not an unqualified action on their part, and you need an adult to oversee decisions of juveniles. But the voice of juveniles must be heard in important jurisdictions affecting their futures, and the Children's Panel is an excellent example of where the child's voice is often decisive in determining what should happen in particular circumstances. So the appointment of someone to look after a child's interests in regards with Social Security is not a casual thing to be thought about. It's important that we are somewhat cynical as parliamentarians, as legislators, in our looking at this particular topic. Why cynical? Because a very small number of those people who are given responsibility will abuse that trust. And we need to make sure that there are provisions to cover that circumstance and penalties for those who take away from the deserving youngsters the emoluments that are provided from the public purse. So this bill takes good steps in ensuring that we can protect the interests of our youngsters, and indeed make some more general provisions in that regard. Now, of course, it also tidies up some of the imperfections in the previous legislation. It would be naive for us to imagine that there is a perfect act out there that reflects a perfect parliamentary process that reflects absolutely everything that might have been relevant to what's going on. Indeed, when this Parliament was established by the 1997 Scotland Act, one of the little errors that was in there, well, important, but it was an error nonetheless, was it made no provision for what should be done if, in calculating the last position to be elected from the list, if there was a tie, who got elected. And as it was first passed, everyone who was tied for last position would be elected to the Parliament. So far from our having a limit of 129 members, we actually, in a sense, almost had no limit whatsoever. Trivial, very unlikely to happen, but every bit of legislation that we might get ourselves involved in will have some flaw somewhere. If we're very lucky, it never matters and it never emerges. So I think it's right and proper that the government brings forward legislation that deals with some of the things that were not quite right in the first iteration of our legislation. I particularly welcome the provisions that bring beyond registered medical practitioners the view of whether someone is terminally ill. I spent a brief period 56 years ago as a nurse in a ward where quite a few of our patients could reasonably be so categorised. And it didn't require a doctor to know that. Even as a callow 17-year-old, one could see that the mortality was beckoning for some of our patients, although I would not have been sufficiently qualified to be someone whose opinion should be relied on in this. But I think nurses are often closer to their patients than GPs, than practitioners in hospitals are. They spend more time with them, and I think that's a good and proper thing to say. Let me just conclude, Presiding Officer, my short contribution to this debate by very much welcoming some of the things that Rachel Hamilton said. She said we should not be working together with the UK government. Well, curiously enough, I think this is a rather collaboration collaborationist government that we have, and that's a good thing, collaborating across the chamber, but also collaborating with the UK government if it's in our mutual interest to do so. Now, if Rachel Hamilton wants to argue that we shouldn't be doing that, I'll make common cause.
Can I just stop you right there, Mr. Stevenson? Can I stop you right there? That may be a short contribution, but you're already a minute and a half over.
I'm most obliged to you, Presiding Officer. One of the difficulties is, and I now, as I peer at the screen, can see the clock, and I will draw my remarks to a conclusion there by saying I'll be happy to support this at decision time.